Hello, Winchester. Welcome to WinCam. The views and opinions on visual radio, as you know, those are the host and his guests, and not necessarily those of the WinCam board of directors, staff, management, members, viewing audience, and all our affiliate stations, Boston, Cambridge, Brookline, Billerica, Ollie out there, Stoneham, Norfolk. Hi to Steve Gay and Pamela Ruby Russell and Eric out there in Norfolk. Steve used to be here at WinCam. He's out at Norfolk now, and they play our show. I just mailed them a package. And tonight, our guest, Song Without Words, Discovering My Deafness Halfway Through Life, Gerald Shea. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for putting up with my spiel.
Very charming.
It's my second show today, so thank you. I had a film director this morning of the new film Disconnected.
Wow.
So that will be out April 12th, so we can't talk about it, so we'll have to talk about you.
Okay, well, why not?
You live in Paris?
I live in Paris, that's right, and I'm back here for a book tour that began on February 25th with my wife, and we're going back to Paris on April 1st. And we've been all over the country. We've been to Boston, starting in February, then to New York, then Washington. I spoke at Politics and Prose, the bookstore in Washington. And then we went back to New York. We've had book events in each city. Then we went out to San Francisco, then to Los Angeles, then back to DC, then to New York, and now we're back in Boston again.
Now that's a big tour.
It's been a busy trip, you know. I think I've made about 25 radio and TV appearances, something like that.
In Boston, you were on BZ last night.
BZ last night with Dan Ray, yeah, which was wonderful. We were supposed to have an hour, but we were interrupted by the news of the resignation of the mayor of Boston. So
my former guest,
20 minutes.
Tom Menino, my former guest.
Very good.
We'll have to have him back on.
Well, that's my distinction, I guess. He and I have both been on your program. That's terrific.
Yeah.
I'll put that on my website.
You know that BZ is what they call, not the corporation, but the name of the style of station is a clear channel station, meaning there's no competition on that dial this side of the Mississippi.
Wow.
So you reach, I mean, I was down in Key West and I could hear it down there.
Wow. Not
great, but you can hear it because nothing else is on 1030. So it's one of these old grandfather stations, one of the oldest stations in the world.
Really? Oh,
and so they kept that clear channel signal. There's a corporation called Clear Channel.
Right.
But this is a clear channel radio station, meaning nothing else is on the channel.
Fabulous.
So you got a lot of coverage.
And I had a good time. He's a very nice man, Dan. And it was a good 20 minutes. 20 minutes was fun.
Oh, that's interesting.
An hour would have been better, but because of Tom Menino, we only did 20 minutes.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, Tom gave his press conference today on NPR and on
did he? Yeah.
the local radio, and I went and got my hair cut in the middle of it, so I missed half of it. But he was
for the show tonight.
Yeah, for you. And also,
well, I've been so busy. I've been able to I'll get my hair cut, I guess, when I get back to Paris.
There were two reasons. The other reason was because I had longer hair this morning. I figured it'll let me shake it up a bit for the two shows, right?
Right. Yep.
So why not? Have you written before?
I have not. I have not, Joe, except as a lawyer. Of course, I've written quite a bit. I've not published anything before. I have some other books in the works that I hope will come out in the very near future on a couple of different subjects. So I've been busy writing. I also did some work, public service work on my own in connection with the torture issue that's been so important these last few years.
Now, as a lawyer, what kind of law?
I practiced corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, and privatizations in Europe. For a number of years, between my years at my law firm, I was at Mobil Corporation, and I lived in the Middle East for 4 years with my wife and family. And then I went back to the firm to do more privatization work in Central and Eastern Europe after the fall of the Iron Curtain.
Now, as you're a lawyer for corporations and you're in Europe, do you have to be multilingual?
You don't really. You have to be able to function well, and I managed finally. We'll get to that, but I managed with hearing aids to be able to function in a tolerant way. But most of the negotiations are done in English. So accents are a problem, but you don't really have to be able to speak French or German or Czech. You can manage quite well in relatively well in English. I don't read lips in French, so I speak French fluently, but it's very hard for me to understand French. Because one can only, to read lips you have to have some hearing, which I have. I do have some hearing. I'm reading your lips to a great extent. But I hear a lot of sounds too. I hear low sounds, which are vowels. If you don't hear any sounds at all, you can't read lips. But if you're partially deaf like I am, you can read lips to a considerable extent, but in your own language, because you learn that from childhood. But you can't do that in a foreign language.
Now, when you read lips, is it like reading fingerprints? Like, is each one different? Like Bridget has different lips?
No, the lips in the same language are the same, unless somebody else is a foreigner speaking our tongue, in which case it's very hard to read their lips because they're not going to pronounce the words or move their lips in the same way.
That was a joke, you know.
I missed it.
Reading the fingerprints, like reading lips, like reading fingerprints. That's okay.
I'm very slow, Joe. You know.
No, you didn't expect me. I was being so serious to throw one from left field. How did you write the book as you're having difficulties with hearing?
How did I write it? Meaning, what led me to write the book, or?
Yeah, and then how did you do it? Did you? You didn't use a tape recorder and then use Dragon, and that's not a joke. Some kind of software to translate it. Did you type? Did you handwrite?
Well, I wrote the first draft by hand, yeah, and then I take the first draft of, let's say, a few pages or whatever, or a chapter, and then type those up, and then I go back and mark those up by hand. That's how I do it. That's how I think everybody writes these days.
Well, you know, Manson's back in the news. That there was this. The lawyer for one of the Manson people died, and they're letting the tapes go to the prosecutors. Mm-hmm. This is this week in the news, and the reason I bring it up is Vincent Bugliosi, who prosecuted Manson,
right,
has been on my show twice by phone. Mm-hmm. He writes his books, and he writes lengthy books,
right,
all longhand on legal pads.
Right. Well, that would be troublesome for me, because I think the magic of writing is being able to get something down on paper and making it legible, and then working with that legible text. That's the way I work. And I think most people, I would guess that most people work that way.
But I like asking different people, because that fascinated me, that this...
Yeah, that sounds like a long, drawn-out process.
It's what he's comfortable with.
Yeah, sure. Many lawyers used to write on legal pads, but now I think most of them use their computers. Now,
you're writing, do you put things in 3-ring binders? Do you have them in filing cabinets? How do you sort through it
I just write in a notepad like this, or usually it's yellow, in longhand. Then I take that longhand, read it, and type it onto the computer, print it out, and then work with the printed document.
Ah, okay, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does.
Very logical and methodical. Mm-hmm. Were you happy when you first started the first, say, chapter, when it first started forming?
I'm very happy when I'm writing. I love to write, almost no matter what I'm writing. So, as I explain in the book, those of us who are partially deaf are working constantly with an infinite vocabulary, because we hear so many non-words and wrong words, which I call lyricals in the book. That's my word for what we hear, because we're not getting the full message. That in the world of conversation, we are working literally with an infinite vocabulary. But then when we're writing and we sit down to write, we're back in the finite vocabulary of the English language. And I think it's much easier for partially deaf people to write than it is for people who hear well.
Well, along these lines, I want to ask about the music, and I have a reason for this. Mm-hmm. What do you play?
I play the piano, and to a certain extent the guitar.
When did you
compose
start?
some music too.
When did you start with the piano?
I started with piano when I was about 4 years old, I think, 5 years old, something like that.
So as a child and as a teenager, you had full hearing?
No, I lost my hearing when I was 6 years old. I had scarlet fever at 6. It was a very serious case. I had chickenpox at the same time. I was sick and in bed for, I think, about 4 weeks. Oh. And then when I emerged from that, I was physically okay, but the world had gone slowly, after that, grew slowly quieter. The crickets and the birds disappeared from my life. The seagull, I could hear a seagull or two, I could hear a crow, but not flocks of birds, not crickets, and not the consonants in our speech, which are the high-frequency sounds that are the markers of what we hear. So I had to use these wrong words and non-words I hear, guess at the consonants, use these words I call, this phenomenon I call lyricals, in order to understand. But I came to believe that everybody heard exactly as I did, imperfectly, and that I simply was spiritually or intellectually slow in understanding what other people were saying.
Now, I have 2 points. The first is, so you were 4, 5, 6 years old.
I was 6 years old when I got scarlet fever, yes.
So you weren't really aware of what was happening?
Afterwards, I was not, but I remember that's absolutely true. As I say in the book, an invisible curtain descended on my world, and I took that simile from my father died a year after I was sick, and I remember visiting him in the hospital. He had rheumatic fever, and he was dying of a failing heart. And he was in an oxygen tent. He didn't say anything, and he smiled at us. But I remember that curtain around him. And after that time, I think a kind of an invisible curtain descended around me that neither I could see nor others could see. And in that quieter world I was living in, I really was unaware of it. But I do remember one of the first days back at school, after I was sick, the teacher saying, Jerry, go to the bob bore and get a bob answer. So I figured out that she meant blackboard, go to the blackboard. So I went to the blackboard and I got a red pencil and I sat down. She said, no, get a bob answer. So I went back to the blackboard, put the red pencil back, got a black pencil because a bob answer is a black pencil, and sat back down. So not long after I was sick, this quieter world was there, but I really didn't realize it. I thought it was simply part of the world I was living in, and there was no demarcation between the prior world and the new world. I simply took the new world as the place that everybody lived in.
Now, in music, there's something called Lady Mondegreens.
Yes.
Have you heard of them?
Yes, of course. Those are people who misunderstand lyrics because the music is obscuring the consonants.
So you have this constant Lady Mondegreen in your life.
That's right. My lyricals are Lady Mondegreens.
Lady Mondegreens, for those out there, if someone's listening to Crimson and Clover by Tommy James and the Shondells and it's December, you might think it's Christmas is over.
Right.
Or something like that.
Or somebody thought he's got this is slightly off color, but he's got the whole world in his hands. Somebody thought that he's got the whole world in his pants. That there's a book that has that title. That's another confusion.
Because there's another one called Excuse Me As I Kiss the Sky. Jimi Hendrix, excuse me while I kiss the sky.
Yes.
Instead of sky, they say guy.
Right.
And
Yep.
so that,
Right. Well, in my case, I've never understood any lyrics. It's rare that I would understand the lyrics to songs, and I have never understood movies. From childhood, my brother has always had to explain to me what the plots of movies were. For me, a movie it began with somebody kissing or happy, and then somebody angry, and then a group would appear with guns, and there'd be a lot of shooting, and then the police or somebody else would come to the rescue. There'd be kissing at the end, and then the lion would appear. You'd see the end, the movie would be over. But for weeks after that time, my brother, for example, would be talking about the movie and tell me what it was all about. I was amazed at his intellectual capacity to decipher those words that people were speaking.
How many siblings did you have?
I have three brothers. I'm number two, and my older brother's a doctor. The third brother is a teacher in New Mexico, and my youngest brother is an actor here in Boston and all over the country. He's the star of Sheer Madness. His name is Patrick Shea.
Oh, wow.
And he's been in Sheer Madness for, I think, 25 years. But he does other things, too. He had bit parts in some major movies like Mystic River and others.
Interesting, very interesting. So we do a public domain show on Friday nights. So, public domain movies, a lot of the silent movies have
Subtitles.
sometimes subtitles.
Sure. Yeah. Well, in France, I live in Paris, and in France, I have to go to American movies or non-French movies so that there are subtitles. But I went to Lincoln the other day, and there's a complex discussion, at least for me, of the 13th Amendment.
Here in America,
In Paris, I went with French subtitles in English. And even with those subtitles, I really couldn't understand the dialogue. So movies are a tough row to hoe for people who don't hear well, for the partially deaf.
Did you like Lincoln?
I loved the character. I loved Daniel Day-Lewis as Lincoln, but I can't. It's hard for me to say I liked the movie because I didn't understand it.
Interesting. The movie I saw last night that I can't talk about too much had 3 stories within the movie. It's fiction in documentary style, but all 3 stories were connected. It was a nice anthology.
Right.
And that's all I can say about it, but I wonder how you would fare with something like that. You'd need subtitles because the plot was very complex.
Yeah, but for me, even Rocky is just as complicated as David Lynch's Mulholland Drive.
Okay.
It's just not, the message just isn't there. I mean, you can tell what people are saying. I think the partially deaf have an advantage when we look at people speaking because we can We hear those vowels, the low frequency sounds, and we're better perhaps at detecting mood than others, but that's not going to get you the real message.
Well, the good news is, Rocky, people have an easier time listening to Arnold Schwarzenegger than Sylvester Stallone. So you're not alone there. How long did it take you to write the book?
It's hard to say. I broke it up with other things, but I think that cumulatively it took me about 5 years to write the book.
Okay, and we do something with our musicians called the demo that got the deal.
That got the deal?
We've been doing it since '91.
Right.
What was the manuscript that landed the book deal? How did you...
What was it? What do you mean?
Did you land the deal in Paris or in America?
Oh, in America. What I did, Joe, is I went out to about 50 agents on the net and by mail. Some of them require mailing. And of those agents, I had 7 who were interested. 4 or 5 firmly so. I can't remember exactly, 4 or 5. And so I had my pick of 4 or 5 agents. None of them the major agents. They were smaller agencies. But I picked the one that I liked the best. And then he went out to publishers. And finally we found interested publishers, and they bought the book. I was ecstatic when they bought the book.
Do you think being a lawyer helped you impress them that, you had...
I don't think so. I think everything has to do with the quality of the writing. And once again, I think I have an advantage when I write because I work in this limited vocabulary, which is much narrower than the one I use every day.
Oh yeah, not to, because I wasn't talking about the quality of the work, but I mean with agents, if that impressed agents more than the book
No,
companies.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they like to meet you. It's interesting to know you're a lawyer, but hey, I don't usually talk about it, but hey, let's see the manuscript. Let's see the writing here.
And how long was your manuscript?
The manuscript, I'm embarrassed to tell you. But I can tell you what's happening with it. The manuscript was 600 pages, and the book is only 291 pages. My editor decided that there were really 2 stories in the book. One was the history of the profoundly deaf and of sign language. The other was my story. And what people really wanted, and what my wonderful editor, Lloyd Lawrence here in Boston at Da Capo, Perseus Books, wanted, was my story. So that deaf history sits out there, another 300 pages, which I could turn into a book, I think, in the space of a couple of months. Whether I do that or not will depend on whether people are interested in reading it.
See, I think that's something to be proud of, that you did that much work.
Yes, it was a lot of work.
Like, if you could hand me that book.
Sure.
There. Record Breakers, Makers and Breakers. I was talking to Bridget outside about the university presses. This book is a ridiculous amount of pages, well over 570, more like 600 pages for this book here. Records, Makers and Breakers. The university presses will put out lots and lots of pages.
Yeah.
Although Clive Davis comes in at 600.
This one?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, yeah.
The fellow who found Janis Joplin and Whitney Houston.
Right.
So they are still willing to, the major publishers, to put out a lot of pages. It's not an exact science.
It's not. And I think that most publishers, for a book like mine, a memoir, they're looking for about 280 to 300 pages.
Now, you don't have to, but we asked some of our authors if you'd like to read some of the book at some point in the show.
Sure.
And you can decide what you want to read for us.
Okay.
That would be fun.
Love to do that.
Great. And do you want to do it now?
Sure.
Okay.
I should set the stage for this. I have to find the right page here. It's a chapter called The Wind in the Willows. And when I finally got hearing aids, I got hearing aids almost by accident. I went on, before I read this, I should explain a bit about my life, I think. I went on through grade school. I was always a good reader and a good writer, but always had trouble understanding the teachers in class. I can remember tearful moments, but I got through grade school pretty well. And then I went off to Phillips Academy at Andover. We were poor. We lived in Salem. We had no money, and I got a scholarship to Andover. Not so much because of my intellectual ability, which was, I had good grades at St. John's, but I'm not a genius. But I could run very fast, faster than most people, and they liked that a lot, especially combined with the fact that I was a good student. So I went to Andover, and in the difficult classes there, in the physics class, I would sit knee to knee with the teacher after each class, and he would give me the class all over again. And I went from low grades to to high grades in that class. And nobody thought I was deaf. I certainly didn't, partially deaf, but simply that I had a different way of learning. Once again, I'm not in the deaf world, in the world of the profoundly deaf who use sign language, but in the world of those of us who hear part of our language, and we are really part of the hearing world. At Yale, I felt sort of not a part because there were great classes, and I really couldn't follow the lectures. I thought it was a wonderful school because everybody picked up their pens and pencils immediately when the teacher started talking, and I really didn't understand what he was saying. In law school, I finally went down to the front of the room and wrote down all the wrong words and non-words that the professors were saying, and then went back to my office. I worked for a teacher and translated those words into English late into the night. And that system worked very well.
Into English from your vernacular? Into
English from my lyricals, from the non-words and wrong words, rereading the case, reconstructing the notes, and finally wound up towards the top of the class. To summarize briefly, professionally, because we want to get to this reading here, it was a very difficult time. And almost by accident, when I was 33 years old, I got a hearing test from a nurse at Mobile when I went to Mobile for a number of years, and she told me that I was deaf. I didn't believe her. For a year, I did nothing. She asked me if I had noises in my head. I did since that illness. I call them locusts. It's called tinnitus, and I thought they were part of the natural world. I denied it, and I didn't believe her, but then for a year I began to follow the minutes of meetings I was attending and compare them with what I'd understood, and there was a dramatic difference. So finally I went to a hearing doctor up here in Massachusetts when I was visiting my mother. He thought I had a brain tumor, that I should see a neurologist. I went back to New York. I felt pretty well, so I went to see the head of ENT at Columbia PNS.
ENT?
Head of ear, nose, and throat, an ear doctor. And he did the tests and explained to me that I was seriously deaf, that I had been for many years, and we traced it back to the scarlet fever. So the magic of hearing aids, to get to this reading, if I can find it, the magic of hearing aids is not so much that they give you the clarity of words. It's that page 185 here, they do help with words, and they made it possible for me to practice law for another 20 years. By giving me a boost and giving me all those easier lyricals. But the magic of them is that one day after I got those hearing aids, and I was sitting out back in Millbrook, New York, on the beginning of a weekend. I had my weekend gin and tonic in hand, and my hearing aids were in my glasses at that time. And I felt out there in the field, nobody was with me. My wife Claire was in the house, friends were in the house, that somebody else was there. I wasn't alone. So I turned on the glasses, and suddenly I heard the sounds of crickets. And this is what I write about here. It's about, I don't know, a page and a half. Crickets had once filled each summer at Main Harbor until they died that 7th year. During the first August, I wore hearing aids just after returning from Mappas Facts, Pie Lines, and Bartered Bankers. Those are lyricals for technical terms. I rented a weekend house with friends in Dutchess County, about 2 hours up the Taconic Parkway from New York City. Millbrook is very much in the country, and the house lay in the hollow of a 200-acre bowl of fields you could survey from a large backyard bounded by low hedges. My first Friday evening, I made myself a gin and tonic and went out back to sit on a bench alone. I was wearing the hearing aids with the switches off. There wasn't a soul outside for miles. All I could hear was the buzz of the locusts in my head. As I looked out over the waves of tall grass, I felt suddenly not alone. At first I thought it was the silent swaying of the grass in the wind, the breathless hush of evening that lingers on the brink of... I turned on the glasses. In a fraction of an instant, the fields came alive with crickets. Not 1 or 2 or 20 crickets, but thousands upon thousands of them, with the glorious high-pitched trill of their wings silencing my locusts. The chorus came from everywhere, north, south, east, west, stretching in from over the hills and fields and pouring into my electrified ears. I turned around in circles to hear it, a melody more hypnotizing even than Puccini's, coming from every direction. The hearing aids were reaching out to the orthoptera, real ones this time, crickets running the bows of their upper wings along the strings of the lower and amplifying the sound with the membranes along their surface as faithfully as the spruce and maple of a violin's hourglass. I had not heard them since before the scarlet fever, and when I turned the hearing aids off, I became suddenly deafer again to them than the female cricket, who, though deaf, has an olfactory sense that detects her lover when he lifts his wings. I turned the hearing aids on and off, from noise within and from noise without and silence within to noise within and silence without, and back again. Thousands of real lives out there in the field, restoring a distant past and raising a new present, born of the displacement of molecules in the air, bearing those and other sounds that gentle rat could hear and Beethoven could not. The birds, the rainfall, the footsteps, the breaths, the water, the crickets, the merry bubble and joy of my life as a young child.
Very nice. You like how I just take off during your
That's
reading
fine.
and play
You're
with
a
the
busy
camera?
man.
Well, I played with the camera because visual radio is it's just our little, it was made so we could do one camera and not have a whole crew if we didn't choose to. Very nice reading. You speak very well.
Thank you. Yes, well, you know, I lost part of my hearing when I was, it's called postlingual, but in fact, partially deaf people, unlike profoundly deaf people, are able to speak well throughout their lives because we hear so much. The profoundly deaf have great difficulty speaking, cannot generally speak, because after all, the ear is an organ of speech, not just of hearing.
Interesting. Tinnitus. Now, William Shatner has it.
He does.
Yes.
Well, many people have it. You know, millions of people have it throughout America. And the problem, and I think most deaf and partially deaf people have it. Some hearing people have it. I think what happens is that somehow the nerve that sends signals from the brain to the ear, or the receptive nerves in the ear, are damaged. So when those sounds come back from the brain that reinforce speech and other sounds, they go awry in the cochlea again and produce this constant buzzing and humming. Beethoven complained that his ears buzzed and hummed all day long, and I think he was so troubled by that and the fact that he couldn't hear other people. He could hear the sound of their voices but not what they were saying, that he wanted to take his own life. He said the only thing that saved his life was his art.
It's fascinating. And that's an interesting description of tinnitus because one would think with all the technology today, and you put a man on the moon, there are so many people and that this can't be cured.
Very hard to cure. There's no cure for tinnitus. I should note that for partially deaf people who wear hearing, if you have tinnitus and you're partially deaf as well, when you do wear hearing aids, they diminish the tinnitus. They diminish the sounds in your head. So if you think you can't hear and you do need a hearing aid, one benefit of the hearing aid is not only crickets and music, which we can get to, but the fact that they will obscure the tinnitus, the noise that you have inside your head.
Now, do you ever put on sounds of the sea and turn it up so that you hear waves and such? Like stereo.
Yes, I love the sound of waves with my hearing aids. The sound of waves, I don't hear them without hearing aids. With them, they're beautiful. The sounds of nature in general are beautiful. The one thing I discovered with hearing aids is you have a music button as well, and even without it, when I got these hearing aids, I could suddenly once again hear the sounds of piccolos and flutes and violins, sounds that I had not heard as a child. As I say in the book, Peter rivals the wolf in Prokofiev, and there too I become a child again. And it was quite a surprise to me to hear the fullness of music. Music for the partially deaf is terribly important because I take the title from Mendelssohn's Song Without Words. A friend of his wanted to put his songs without words, to provide the words to his songs without words, and he said, no, you shouldn't do that because the message is already definite. The definite message is there. And what's beautiful, wonderful for us who don't hear well is that particularly with hearing aids, we can hear the fullness of the sound of music and hear that definite message. And it's an important link, it's a vital link for us to the hearing world. For the profoundly deaf, if you've ever seen deaf people signing, many of you out there I'm sure have, if you watch them signing to each other, it looks like they're conducting two symphonies together. And the deafblind who communicate by touch, if you watch them, it looks like they're conducting a joint symphony. It's a beautiful thing, and that is their music.
Now, when you're at the piano, do you ever invite Jim Morrison over to sing?
Well, you know, at Yale I sang at Yale College in the Whiffenpoofs, which is the senior group at Yale. It's a one-year experience, and it's an honor, I guess, to be a Whiffenpoof. I made it. I have a good singing voice. I can hear those low notes. I could those days. This was before the days of knowledge of my problem of hearing aids. I could never hear the pitch pipe. When the pitch pipe went around to give us the pitch, I'd have to wait for all the others to start singing. and I had a strong baritone and bass beside me, so I could pick up the pitch from them. I was told by the pitch pipe quite often to quiet down because I was sticking out, because I was, singing. I couldn't get the sense of the volume.
Yes.
And of course, I knew the words because I can read. So that was music has always been very close to my heart. Piano too, as I said.
Interesting. So, do you record the music you write?
I don't record. I've never recorded the music I write. After I retired early from law practice, I was only 53. I thought after those 20 years of practicing complicated law and leading large groups, I looked for various solutions to my hearing dilemma. This is again in the period where I had full knowledge of the problem. I lay out telex machines, telex transmitters on the table to come back to my hearing aids. That didn't work very well with an omnidirectional mic, but it only worked with the person right in front of it, and that transmitted to a receiver on my belt, and then I wore a loop around my neck, and it magnetically came up to the hearing aids. But those were not good solutions, and it was a very trying time. In fact, at one point in my life of law practice, I developed serious ulcers and was very, very sick. It took a lot of medicine for that, drying out the system, stomach coatings, Valium, coffee to counteract the Valium. And finally, the firm sent me to Paris, where life was easier in those days, not today.
Really?
But the ulcers didn't go away, Joe, until I got the hearing aids. And 2 weeks after I got them, my wife, Claire, said, you know what the problem is. She could see I was well. She took all my pills and threw them away. So all this was eating away at my stomach, when in fact the problem was with the ears.
I thought it might have been that the law was complicated and really just getting to you because you're working with all these. What is it? It's just complexities.
It was the lack of knowledge of the problem, because the complexities persisted even with the hearing aids. I've forgotten where we're going in the general conversation, but we
were talking about the recording of the music.
Oh, the recording. Yeah. No, I've never recorded the music. When I withdrew from practice, I decided to write Christmas plays for the kids, simple plays with Santa Claus, where I'd play Santa Claus, and I would write pieces of music, and I got a hold of an orchestra leader. I forget how I met him somewhere, and he would come over to the house, and he and I would work together, and he would do the arrangements for the melodies that I wrote, and I would compose melodies, and he would say, well, where are you? I'd go halfway through a piece, and he would say, well, where are you taking this? And he would lead me through it, and so we'd come up with some sheet music, and for the Christmas plays, there'd be a cello and a violin, maybe a wind instrument, and a piano, and it came out beautifully.
Oh, fascinating.
So it was great fun. I know you're a musician too, so much better than I am. So
well,
mine was ABC.
I wouldn't say much better. I just use the instruments to write my songs.
Mm-hmm.
I think the songs are good, but I don't know. I let other people. It's just interesting when you work with people like Bobby Hebb. Mm-hmm. We were discussing Bobby off camera.
Sure. Yep.
I'm not worthy. It's like he's just in a whole other league. But that I can appreciate his music and that I can produce his music. That's a whole other. Producing.
Yep.
Is a whole other thing. And this little TV show had taped a lot of Bobby Hebb.
Wow.
So a lot of his signature tunes he never recorded are very important songs to his life, like Nancy with the Smiling Face, mm-hmm. the Frank Sinatra tune.
Sure.
So we have that from the TV show.
Yep.
We have him doing Got My Mojo Working, which was his signature song before he wrote Sonny.
Wow.
It was a cover that Muddy Waters had done. Muddy didn't write it.
Mm-hmm.
But Bobby played it night after night, and when he toured with the Beatles, he played Sonny and Mojo Working.
Wow.
So we have two versions for the box set of this. It's just important. And maybe people don't remember from the 60s, because I'm sure tens of thousands of people saw him, but now it's 40 years later, 50 years later.
It's fun to hear you talk about the 60s and the 70s, because those were the years when I was in the office from 9:30 in the morning until 1 or 2 in the morning, 6 or 7 days a week. So you're talking about a world, Joe, that I really never knew. In fact, you'll be shocked to hear that I was in Père Lachaise Cemetery only about 5 years ago, and somebody said to me, pointed to a grave right next to us, and he said, that's where Jim Morrison is buried. And I said, who's Jim Morrison? And he said, or she said, I can't remember, the Doors, and I said, what's the Doors? And they said, Jerry. Then they said, I think it's Come On Baby, Light My Fire.
The first hit.
Try to set the night on fire. Ooh. And of course I know that song, but I had no idea who sang it because I was working all the time. So I would hear it, on a Saturday night or something.
Now, we've interviewed all the Doors,
Jeez.
their engineer Bruce Botnick, and my late girlfriend dated Jim Morrison,
Wow.
JoJo Lane. So, JoJo, tell Jim we said hi. Now, I had Stephen Davis on. Stephen Davis is a local author, but he wrote the Aerosmith book, Led Zeppelin.
Sure.
He has a book called Jim Morrison, so he wanted to focus on Jim and not the Doors.
Right.
So he's on the show and he goes, Jim is dead. And I'm saying, Jim is not dead. Jim just wanted to get out. That's my theory, right? No, Joe.
His music certainly isn't dead.
Right. Well, and there's a book called Secret and Suppressed by the late Jim Keith about conspiracy theories. It's a great book, Secret and Suppressed.
Right.
And he has a whole chapter on Jim Morrison and why he's not dead.
Ah.
Jim had taken Led Zeppelin publishing because he wanted to take it away from Led Zeppelin,
Right.
see the name.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the publishing was reactivated in the 80s. And there's all these clues Jim Keith comes up with. The grave was too short in the cemetery in Paris. And,
Right.
he was dead 3 days before they filed the death certificate in Paris and 8 days before the news came to America. So I'm telling Stephen Davis, he's still alive. It was all just to get out of the biz.
Right.
Come on. The fellow from Enron might still be alive.
Yes.
Morris Levy, who had Roulette Records.
Right.
And Tommy James and the Shondells. I thought, he moved to Argentina. There's got to be multimillionaires and billionaires that fake their own passing.
That could be. It could be. But lawyers are generally skeptical about that sort of thing. So I hear you, but I would need stronger proof than that, Joe.
But here's a funny one. In the 1980s, when VH1 and MTV happened, and they were playing Doors videos, I hear that a lot of that generation thought it was a hip band, the Doors, and that they could go out and see them. Because they weren't aware of the history. And it's like, oh, this is on TV. This must be
Right.
So it's an interesting world. And we got off because you live in Paris, and
Yep.
Jim Morrison is a topic of our show, so we thank you for your contribution.
Not at all. No. I wish I'd known who he was.
But that's...
I would have had a happier life in the 60s and 70s, believe me.
Now, see, Stephen Davis would disagree with me, but I think he's hanging out with you and you don't even realize it. I think he just surreptitiously moves through Paris.
Well, I'll start looking for him. Maybe he was in Midnight in Paris, Woody Allen's film. Maybe he could have been spotted there, perhaps.
One more Paris question. Recently, major cities turned all the lights out for a night. Did you see the Eiffel Tower? The lights were turned off?
When was that?
Last week.
Yeah, but I've been away from Paris now for 5 weeks on the book tour, so...
But it was on the news, so I don't know if in the hotels you saw the news. Or
No, I haven't. I follow the news on my iPad, so I didn't see it there.
Interesting, yeah. So if Paris turned the lights out
I
in
tend not to
Beijing-
watch TV because I don't have my earphones with me. I should tell the partially deaf people out there, if you're listening to us, those of us who surely are, that one of the best devices you can use to improve your life is a Sennheiser or Siemens infrared system, FM system. It plugs into your TV and transmits sound to an earphone you wear under your chin and in your ears. And that clear sound of voice is perhaps the best hearing aid in the world, and it can be your connection to the world, because the voice of the speaker is right in your ears. Sound diminishes exponentially with distance, and if you can cut off that distance and improve the quality, as this FM system does, you'll be amazed at how much it can do for you. You can control the volume yourself so that you're not bothering other people in the room.
Now, when you return to Paris next week, are you going to stay in Paris for a while?
We will be in Paris for a while, yes. My son is getting married on June 15th, so we've got a plan for that.
Congratulations. In Paris?
In Paris, yeah. Yes, in Paris, absolutely, to a girl who was educated like he was, at Yale like I was. So I'm sure they're very much in love with each other. I don't think where you're educated matters, but that was a coincidence. They're very much in love with each other.
Did they meet there at Yale?
I'm sorry?
Did they meet there?
They met afterwards.
Oh.
She's an architect, and she went to the architecture school too. So we'll be planning for that, but also I'll be planning our book party in London, and I'll be appearing in London, I hope, in bookstores, radio, television, and in Dublin as well. The book is going to come out, and I have to be doing work for this too. It's being published in France by Gallimard, the major French publishing company, at the end of next year. So I'll have to be working with the translator they've hired to do the book to come out with a French version. I hope it will be translated in other countries too, and we're going to start to work on that at the London Book Fair, and I'll be over there in that connection next month.
And that was my next question to you, the other languages. So you can read French.
Of course, yes.
You can read French, so you'll be able to, unlike other authors, you'll have a good understanding if they're getting it right.
I will, but I think you have to give a translator a lot of leeway because, after all, they're professionals. And I wouldn't try to, I haven't met him yet, but I understand he's one of the best in France. And I wouldn't try to nitpick him to death on the translations unless I thought there was really a major mistake.
Now, are there dialects in France like we have here in America? You have the southern drawl, you have
Yes.
the New England accent. Are there severe dialects in
There are.
France?
The people down in Marseille is the southern accent, and you have different accents from different regions. Of course, I don't understand French, even Parisian French, when they speak it, because I can't read lips in French. But those accents do exist, and they're a terrible problem for me. One interesting thing about sign language is that a lot of people may not know is that I learned in connection with my work on the book is that each country or region has its own sign language because there's no inherent connection between the words we use and reality. Otherwise, we'd all speak the same language. And similarly, there's no inherent connection between the signs people use. Sign is a form of speech, really, and reality. So each area in the world throughout history, sign language is hundreds of thousands, is as old as speech. Each area or region has its own language. So English Sign Language and American Sign Language and French Sign Language and Spanish Sign Language are all different.
That blows my mind. I would think that sign language would have some kind of universal...
No, it's just like speech. It's just like, one shouldn't be surprised that Spanish people speak differently from French people, or German people, let's say. It's simply because they grew up in a different, historically speaking, with no connection, little connection between the two countries. And similarly, the deaf communities grew up relatively isolated too over the past X hundreds or tens of thousands of years. So those languages sprang up differently too. American Sign Language, on the other hand, is somewhat similar to the French because the great French teachers of the 19th century were brought over here by Thomas Gallaudet. And a lot of the French Sign Language made it into the American deaf community, so that it's interesting, American Sign Language is closer to the French Sign Language than it is to the English Sign Language.
Now, see, the reason, my logic behind why it would all be similar is because I think if you do this, everyone gets it all the way around the world.
Yes, that's right. That's a common signal. It's not a language. It's a gesture.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you do this, people kind of get it.
Yep.
And if you do this, thumbs up, I think around the world, especially in this day and age,
Sure.
with multimedia and a new world order.
Right.
So
You can think of other signs too that people would understand.
I didn't go there. I thought it, but he said it. I just want to make that clear that I had the decorum to not go there.
I apologize.
No, you don't have to. Songwithoutwords.com is the website.
That's it, yes.
I should have said it earlier. I'm going to say it again, songswithoutwords.com. At this point, we're going to wrap up, and we talked to a film critic
Wonderful.
from Houston, and you're welcome to stay here. And
I'd be delighted.
it's, I think Beyond Tomorrow is the film, and WinCam, for everyone to know, tomorrow night, 9 p.m. tomorrow night, the 29th of March, is the final of this Hitchcock series. We had the Alfred Hitchcock series.
Wow.
We must have done 15 of them, 39 steps.
Wonderful film.
I can't remember the film we're playing tomorrow night. I should, but there were so many Hitchcock movies. We decided to start...
I hope it's North by Northwest. Have you done that?
I don't know if that's in the public domain, and
I got you.
we did play Blackmail, which
know
was
it.
the first talkie that Hitchcock did in England, and it was one of the first talkies in England, maybe one of the first 5.
Wow, I don't even know the film.
Yeah, so Blackmail, and you can find them on YouTube, because public domain means the copyright.
Sure.
So you're a lawyer, you know that.
Yep.
I didn't mean to presume otherwise. What we're doing now at WinCam, as you know, we're reviewing the movies from a week from tomorrow night. So we did the Hitchcock movie either last week or the week before. We're going to talk about Beyond Tomorrow with Frank Dell'Istrito, which will air our first April movie, which will be about April 6th or 8th or whatever it is, next Friday night. No, April 5th, because Monday is the 1st.
It is the first.
And It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Great pleasure for me, Joe, to be here. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, double the time you got on Dan Ray's show.
Absolutely.
But
and it's been a great pleasure.
He reached more people instantly. But it's kind of fun. You're doing both mediums.
What concerns me most, what pleases me most is when people like the book. And I don't care how many people it is, but if they tell me that they have loved the book, that's wonderful, and that's why it was written.
It's a fascinating story. And for about 2 years, I've been dialing this fellow's number, and I still have to write it down. Now, years ago, I had all my phone numbers in my head. Now I get emails in my head. You know, the emails I memorize, but the phone numbers are hard.
Frank Delestrino.
Frank, say hello to Gerald Shea.
Hello, Frank.
Gerald?
Gerald is deaf, so he only can read your lips.
Okay, well, I don't know what to do.
Well, it's going to be hard to hear, Frank, but you go ahead. Can I listen in on the receiver?
No.
No. Okay.
No. But we're talking about Beyond Tomorrow.
You okay? Yes, Beyond Tomorrow is the movie. And once again, you're showing a Christmas movie, a little off-season, but that's okay. And it's a Christmas movie with 3 ghosts, but don't think of A Christmas Carol, because there's very little in common with that. It is a very sweet movie. I think some of your viewers may find it a bit too sweet. But there is a flash of cruelness at the end, but you have to be subtle, because this character, who as far as I'm concerned has done nothing wrong, and a voice from beyond tells us that she has no soul. And I said, what did she do? What did she do to deserve that? And but I want, this is a kind of a routine programmer movie, but there's one thing I'd like your viewers to watch, and that is the heights of the actors. The second female lead in it, who plays a prominent Broadway performer, is played by an actress named Helen Vinson, who is 5'7". Now, 5'7" for a woman in the 1940s was well above average.
5'7" was tall for women in the 40s?
Yes. My mother was 5'6", and her whole life she was told how tall she was. And Helen Vinson was considerably taller than a lot of the leading men of the era. And she co-starred over her career with Edward G. Robinson and Paul Muni and George Raft and James Cagney, all of who were diminutive men. I mean, well below 5'6". They covered that as best they could, but they were quite short. And it somewhat hurt her career. You know, when they filmed the scene with her, they had to stand on a box. And so she might have broken out of the second tier of leading ladies, and on this, as this movie is made, she's kind of on the downside of a rather short career. And she's 33 years old, and in 5 years she'll give it up altogether. But one of the things that I definitely heard is that for her woman, she was very tall. She was 4 inches taller than the lead female actress, who's 5'3", Jean Parker, who is still with us, by the way.
Well, that's nice.
She was 25 when she made this, so this movie is 1940, so 73 years ago, so she is in her late 80s now, but she's still with us. And the other height I want you to watch is the English actor, C. Aubrey Smith, who was 6'4". And that didn't hurt him as much being that tall as it certainly hurt a woman, but a lot of his co-stars had to stand on boxes, because it looks rather odd when you're filming a scene to get the conversation between two characters in a close-up, to get them in the same frame without doing something. And so watch that and watch. I mean, some scenes you'll appreciate the difference. They have two characters standing side by side, where they, for whatever reason, they didn't put them on a box in that scene, and then a few moments later they're shoulder to shoulder. So it's one of the tricks movie makers use to set up a frame. They're trying to get the composition of the shot, so they don't mind making someone look taller or someone look shorter. And the three ghosts in this movie, the 3 elderly men who are alive when the movie starts, but are soon speaking to us from beyond. The range of their heights is about a foot. Charles Winninger, who played a lot of lovable characters during the 1940s, he claimed to be 5'6". My guess is he was considerably shorter than that. Short actors usually claim to be a lot taller than they are. Tall actresses usually claim to be a lot shorter. So he was he was about a foot shorter than C. Aubrey Smith, and in some of the scenes you can appreciate that. In some of them, they're compensating. They're trying to get the three men's heads in a frame, and I can certainly sympathize with that.
Did we review this movie before?
We did. We showed this sometime last year, not at Christmas time. We never show Christmas movies during Christmas time. I don't know why. And we had this about a year ago. And so I had used the angle of the three ghosts. It's not Christmas Carol then, but I wanted to give your listeners and your viewers something else to talk about.
Well, very cool. I'm not sure what the next movie is, but I'd like us to go on the Oz series.
Okay. Well, I'm at your beck and call on that. You pick the movies, and I'll do my best to talk about them.
Very cool. Is there anything else we should know? Or we can wrap up?
We can wrap up if you want. The leading actor is Richard Carlson, who I imagine most of your viewers have seen as the leading man in Creature of the Black Lagoon. The leading scientist, I should say. He doesn't play the creature. And a couple of science fiction movies from the 1950s, Richard Carlson. And he is 5'11", which for a leading man in the 40s is a little over average.
And isn't Maria Uspenskaya in this movie?
Maria Uspenskaya is in that, and that is a good point, and she's probably the shortest one of all. I doubt she was 5 feet. Let me see if I can quickly look that up, because I know you're running out of time.
Maria Uspenskaya was in The Wolfman.
Yes.
Back in the 30s.
And, I'm going to say something that's going to... Okay, she was 5'1.5 inches.
5'1". She looked... I think she was... Oh, yeah, the way you walk was thorny, my son, but as the moon, right?
Yep.
The werewolf.
And Lon Chaney Jr., who played the Wolfman, stood over 6 feet. And so imagine trying to set up a frame with them. Not easy.
Wow. Frank, we'll talk next week with another movie.
Okay, and let me know when you can. I hope it's an Oz movie. Talk to you then.
All right, thanks, Frank. And thank you for here. We can talk. We can just hold them if you want. We've got
Terrific.
3 minutes left. I didn't want to abandon you because I realized
that's fine.
Could you hear anything he was saying?
I know, yeah, sure, I could hear quite a bit. I know that he was talking about short people and tall people and movies.
Yes, and so Beyond Tomorrow, he said the woman was 5'7" and she was rather 5'6". She was rather tall for the movie.
Oh my goodness.
For back in the day.
Okay.
So.
The one thing I should mention is that the telephone is, speakerphones are murder for the partially deaf.
Oh.
But telephone receivers are great because you can get an electronic switch in your hearing aids. And when you put the receiver close to your ear, it will amplify those consonants to an extent that will make you able much more clearly to understand excuse me, what people are saying. Not only that, but the speaker's voice is right in your ear. It's just like those earphones for the television. And so telephone actually can be easier for partially deaf people than talking to people across a room.
I apologize that we put you through that, but educationally it's kind of interesting to hear that you have that reaction.
People have grown taller over the years.
No, I'm talking about your reaction to the speakerphone.
Oh, yes, yeah, right.
I think for an educational aspect of the show, that I wouldn't have thought of that.
Very, very difficult to hear people over the speakerphone if you're on the receiving end, and very difficult if you're on the telephone to hear people speaking into a speakerphone, because once again, that distance between them and the speaker picks up. Sound diminishes exponentially with distance because it travels in a sphere. So the closer the speaker is to you, and when the speaker's in your ear, the better off you are.
We hope you have a lot of fun on the European branch of the tour.
Thank you, Joe.
Perseus must be excited that you're over there. Are these imported books?
I'm sorry,
do they export the books to
They do
Europe?
export the books, and the books are selling in London. They're selling in, we'll be going to Ireland too. And Percy is going to help organize the London events and the Irish events too, and I hope events all over Europe as
That's
the
very
year
exciting.
unfolds. Yeah.
And then you have the French release, and we've got about a minute left. Mm-hmm. I really appreciate your time. You're concluding your great American tour here in this show.
I'm absolutely delighted to be doing it. You know, the book is not just a book about, although it's important that it's a book about me and my character as a partially deaf person, but it's also a book about communication. After all, what distinguishes us from other creatures is our ability to speak and to understand speech. And in a way, you can say that speech and language is our modern soul. And so the book is really a story, my story. It's a story of a struggle for communication of all partially deaf people, of profoundly deaf people too, and of the deafblind as well. And it's a story, though, about how all human beings struggle to communicate with others, and in doing so, struggle to conserve our own humanity.
Jerry Shea, thank you for being on the show. I want an autograph. And good luck over in Europe.
Thank you, Joe.
Visual Radio Live, we're preempted next week, but we'll have a studio show playing next Thursday. Thank you, Judy Kellerman. Thank you, Bridget. Good night.